Towards the burning northern lights and ice of unknown shores we walk. Enter the worlds of Svavelvinter and the forbidden lands with Swedish role-playing game writer and novelist Erik Granström. Welcome to Tales Under the Cat Tree. I'm your host, Dupes, and these are tales by humans for humans. After all, words and stories are what give meaning to the worlds we live in. Those are the vocals of Christian Elverstam, a Swedish metal musician from a song called Wonderland, with lyrics written by my guest and former colleague Erik Granström. I've linked to the lyrics pages on Erik's blog, and you can find links to the music on Apple Music and Spotify in the show notes. The name of the band, Svavelvinter, was inspired by modules that Erik wrote for the Swedish role-playing game Drache och Demoner, Dragons and Demons, which then ended up becoming a set of novels. Unfortunately, most of this is in Swedish and much of it out of print these days. Erik's other work with another role-playing game, Forbidden Lands, Rogues and Raiders in a Cursed World, is very much in print and available from Free League Publishing. Here is how the Forbidden Lands is introduced to role-players.
Did you hear the story of the Forbidden Lands, beyond the mountains, beyond the mists of the north? Once it was called the Raven Land, our promised land. These days strange creatures haunt those valleys, beasts that should not be, for the land is cursed. Once Sigurd the Spellbinder was one of us, leading the passage through the mountains into the new land. But when faced by the savage orcs, he opened dark gates to seek the help of demons. That was his undoing. Sigurd turned on us and placed himself on the throne of the Raven Land, his daughter Thorania by his side. To keep their vile corruption from spreading, our wise king built a great wall across the mountain pass and forbade all to ever speak of what had happened. Since then, the Spellbinder's domain is known as the Forbidden Lands. To this day, the Demon King and his daughter still rule there, using the feared Rust Brothers of the demonic blood mist, sucking the life out of anyone who dared stray too far from their hearth. Sigurd and Thorania have kept the human folks who still live north of the wall under their heel, yet not all is lost. For now the blood mist has lifted, and there are those who dare defy the Demon King and his daughters. Adventurers, treasure hunters, scoundrels, not heroes, far from it, but men and women who dare travel the land as they choose and make their own mark on it, unbound by any fate or story set for them. They hunt for ancient treasures, they fight whomsoever gets in their way, they build a new world for themselves on the ruins of the old. They are the raiders of the Forbidden Lands.
Hello, I'm Erik Granström, and I've been working with DUPS actually on MySQL some years ago. But from start, I'm trained as a veterinarian. I haven't worked much as a veterinarian, but my introduction to MySQL was playing floorball with one of the founders. That was my sole merit, I think. So I got in there and I worked on marketing and stuff there for like 10 years. But lately I've been writing. I'm writing for role-playing games, and I've also been writing a little for computer games and then some novels.
And this is what we're here for today. Not MySQL, not veterinary studies, not floorball, is actually about your role-playing games and Sweden and its history in role-playing games. So tell me how it's been, how the last, is it 20 years now of working on role-playing games and things like that?
I started playing Dungeons & Dragons in the 70s, actually, 1976. It was the first edition of Dungeons & Dragons, very primitive stuff. But it was very early, and we had nothing like that in Sweden at the time. So a guy brought it home from the US, and we started playing it. And then it got to Sweden. It's kind of a story of its own. Books have been written about this. A young guy went to the US from Sweden and worked with these producers of role-playing games there. And he thought, I should start this in Swedish, because we have a tradition of playing board games in Sweden. But he got a license for, I think, basic role-playing, and started up his own game in Sweden, which is called Drakar och Demoner. That is dragons and demons, yeah. He wanted something sounding similar to Dungeons and Dragons, but not the same thing. And it's not the same game, actually, at all, but it's often been confused with that. So he started that up in Sweden, and in 2 years or so, it took off really well. So I think it sold like 300,000 copies. And I mean, Sweden at the time had about 8 million inhabitants. So it was all over the place among the young guys mostly. And then if you sell these 100,000s of copies and then you play in groups, so you had a lot of people playing. So basically everybody I meet nowadays that are 50 or so have been playing this when they were kids. And they have a lot of nostalgia about it. So I sort of I have an inroad to basically anybody of that age in Sweden.
How many people in Sweden do you think play role-playing games these days?
It almost died out in the 90s because of the computer games. There was just a trickle left of it, but then it has taken off again. So now it's pretty big again. And also young people are starting to play it. I suppose they get a little bored by computer games, even though you can play online, of course, but it's a way of meeting your friends sitting around the table, as you well know. I don't know how many today, but lots of new role-playing games are produced in Sweden these days. And we are also quite successful on the international market. For instance, they had this old game called Drakar och Demoner in Sweden, which was a big one. It has now been released like the 50th iteration or so by a company I work for, and they have translated it into English, and there it's called Dragonbane.
I was actually looking through Dragonbane just a few weeks ago.
And it's quite successful. We won lots of Ennies and stuff with that. So they are now starting to translate my old Swedish campaign from the 80s into English. So we're working on that right now. And also I got involved in producing another game, fantasy game called Forbidden Lands, which I think is translated into 8 or 10 languages or so.
The adventures that you published, what brought you back into the fold of being a more professional role-playing game?
You mean now, these later days?
These later days, yeah.
I was actually asked to do it. They contacted me about it. In the old Drakar och Demoner, the old Dragonbane was very popular, like I said, in Sweden, and there's a lot of nostalgia around their drawings. So they made an art book, this company called Free League Publishing. They made an art book of his old paintings, and that was a Kickstarter, and one of the stretch goals was to make a new game from the existing artwork. And that they fulfilled that stretch goal. A couple of years later, they asked me, we're starting to do this now. Do you want to do it? So sure, why not? I got this whole bunch of old paintings from the 80s. They said, you can do whatever you like with these, but you have to include them. Write a new fantasy role-playing game, and these are the specifications, obviously, they had. They wanted to do it this way and that way. So then I wrote Forbidden Lands, and I write it in Swedish, and then they simultaneously translated it into English, so it was published in Swedish and English at the same time. Yeah, so I got pretty much free hands to do that. I could do it any way I wanted to, and of course I did. So I thought, okay, I have these hobbits. I have to have all the elves and hobbits and that old stuff. But I thought, okay, I don't want to do it the same way as the way it's expected. So I made twists on all these races. I call them kins, actually, because races is not so good anymore. And also it's incorrect for me as a veterinarian. It's more like species. So anyway, I made twists, and those have been pretty well received. And it's a much more gritty game where everybody hates everybody else, basically. Also, it has turned out, I didn't plan it that way, but what the game master reads isn't necessarily true, which it usually is. People ask me, do the gods really exist, or how does magic actually work? And I say, well, it's claimed this and that at that temple, but I wouldn't know. I presented a world history, and then in the next campaign, you got some information. This is probably not true. This is probably just the way humans think it is. It is very human-centric, so this is probably what happened. But then we don't know if that's true either, so...
So as you play the adventures, you're actually unlocking more of what might be the truth.
Exactly. You get more of the information of the world and what is really going on here.
What's the general premise of the adventure?
The tagline is rogues and raiders in a cursed land. So the first thing was you came to this land And one of the basic things was that this land had been covered for several years, hundreds of years, in a red mist that arose at night. And anybody caught in that mist was killed. But that only happened if you were out of your own village. So if you were in your village, the mist would come in and it wouldn't touch you. And everybody was scared, of course, and nobody understood what is this. You do get an explanation of it in-game. And then it suddenly disappeared. So like 2 or 3 years before the game starts, this mist just lifted and disappeared. Nobody knows why or what it was. And then people sort of start looking out from their own village and say, okay, I'm out of here. I hated to be here in the first place. I'm out of here. Let's see what's out there. So you come to this very fresh, it's almost like a post-apocalyptic world, but in a fantasy setting. Well, the specifications were that all the missions in the game, you should be able to solve them in different ways, by negotiating or being smart or just attacking everything you see. And also you should be able to pick sides, so there's not an evil versus good as such.
What's the difference between writing an adventure versus writing a novel?
It's quite a big difference because writing a novel, you're totally in control. You do it on your own, and you can control the whole story and what people say, what they do, and what happens. In a game, it's more like presenting a table, like a smorgasbord, and let the players and the game master decide what to do with it. So it's much more open. And also I have to always consider all the possibilities. Okay, they come to this village. They might just burn it down the first thing they do. They might get friendly with this guy or with those guys and take sides. So you always have to be open. You sort of more present a problem or a complexity. And you come to a village, typically there are different factions that try to recruit you for their cause. So it's much more open.
So let's go back to the books and the original adventures. So walk me through what those were like. And those were written for Drachen och Demoner.
Drakar och Demoner.
Drache och
Dragons
Demoner.
and Demons, yeah. So yeah, I started out, I was a game master in Dungeons and Dragons for some years. So I had some material lying around. And then when they started up in Sweden, which was like in 1982. Then one of my friends and players got involved in writing a short adventure for the new game that came in Swedish. And he suggested, why don't you do this as well? You have a lot of material. And I said, sure, why not? So I contacted them and said, would you be interested if I wrote this adventure for you? Sure, they said. So I wrote the synopsis and I sent it to them and said, okay, yeah, go ahead. And then I write this first adventure, which is called Svavelvinter, now in English, The Brimstone Sleep. I wrote that adventure, which takes place on a subarctic island, like Iceland or southern Greenland. So you come there and you have different reasons to be there. And it's an occupied place by power from the south. They have occupied the place because there are sulfur marshes there, and sulfur is very expensive. So they have taken over the place and are sending prisoners there to scoop up sulfur from the marshes. It's really a terrible place to be. And then it turns out there are political things going on underneath. And that was the first adventure I wrote, and I didn't have much more plans. I said, okay, you come from this Tracoria, which is this land, more like Britain in this fantasy world. And I said it's a feudal land, which I then regretted. So I said, no, it's not feudal. It's actually Renaissance. So then I said, they wanted me to continue build on this. Okay, so then I had to write about Tracoria. And what is that? What country is that? So I made a module about Tracoria with some small adventures in it. And those are now being reissued by Free League Publishing.
So with all the material that you built for these adventures, then you wrote some novels with it.
Yeah. And those are expanded, of course, from I didn't want elves or dwarves or hobbits in the novel. So there I have some more like, I don't know if you heard of Lysenko, this Russian genetic person who was a fake. Anyway, it's more like humans if they are isolated, their genetics will change and they will turn into wolfmen or whatever. So there's a lot of variation in the human species there.
So with the novels, you took the setting, you took some of the politics, I assume, and things like that, and you created a story that follows. Like, is it a sequential set of novels?
Yeah. So, and it's basically you can always everything in the game is there in some way, but often twisted in another way, so it means something else.
When you have to move from writing adventures into novels and set a story that is controlled, is one more freeing than the other, or is it a lot?
I think it's just different. Actually, it's just different. It's when you have done the one thing and then you start on the other, you think, oh, this is such a relief. Now I can do this and this. And it goes both ways. Because in a game, you can be much more mysterious. You don't have to explain things. You don't have to have the depth in character because that's supposed to be added by the players and the game master. But that's also one of the funny thing by writing a novel. I mean, you can go into depth, and you can also be much more complex, of course, because you control it all. I've always been interested in philosophy. I read a lot about postmodernism and things like that. And I could sort of build it into the novels, since in this novel, the premise is that the world exists as a blueprint that the gods made. And then the world is made from the blueprint. It's just as the blueprint was started by the higher gods, and then they just shoved it down, the hierarchy. Or what do you say? Yeah, the lower gods. So it's the ones who actually implement it don't really know how it should be done. So it's not perfectly done. So the world is kind of messed up. And then what happens is that when the higher gods think, okay, now you really messed it up, we need to reset things here. We do a conflux. It's a reset of the world to plan. If you think we worked on the MySQL, you do this version, MySQL 3 point, and then add numbers as you fix the bugs. And then you come to a point where we can't fix the bugs anymore. We have to do a new version. So after the conflux, you have version 5.0, 4.0 instead. Basically, I actually took that metaphor from my work at MySQL.
I was going to say, I think you just described every single business on the planet. You have a blueprint of what you want to do, and as you expand everybody and everyone tries to take that blueprint, and it doesn't quite work out the way that you expected. Sometimes better, sometimes not as better.
So anyway, this blueprint is a language. The high language is called the novels. So if you say something in the high language, changes will occur in the world, in the physical world. And if you change the blueprint, it will be like that, but it will always have been like that. So nobody even remembers what it was like before. And that's kind of an interesting philosophical context. So I was interested in language philosophy, and I had this high language. So I made all the magicians in the novels, based them on language philosophers like Nietzsche, Wittgenstein, Husserl, and so on. And then I could have them say things that these philosophers said and quote them, which was kind of fun to do. In a sort of entertaining way, hopefully, not to make it too deep.
When people write fantasy settings are extremely interesting, but they're very different physics and mechanics and things like that. How difficult was it for you to kind of express that? In a game, it's fairly easy. The players are already there. They're already expecting the game to have those mechanics. But in a novel setting, you're having to take the reader through understanding all of that.
Yeah, and that's what I didn't do. So that's what some people don't like about the novels, but I did it anyway. You are just placed into this world, and they don't really explain it to you because you have these people living in this world. Why should they explain things that they already know? So you're sort of dumped into there, and you have to find out sometimes the hard way. What is this about? So I don't explain that much. You get it explained as you go. Yes, some people don't like that. They want to know, for instance, do the gods exist? People ask me that frequently in the games as well. And I don't think they have to know. It's like in our world, we don't know if the gods exist, but they are still a political factor. And that's the way I want it to be, Well, we might believe that they exist or not. And then, of course, the fantasy world is not like our world, because I have an animistic world where the clouds, for instance, are living beings that some magicians can talk to and control. You have demons that take care of certain aspects of the world and so on. I think it's an opportunity to, what if it's like this? And then you just write it like that. And often I like to do parody on our world as well. So they have this commercial religion in the Tricorian Empire. The main saying of the goddess is, she loves the one who loves themselves. And they think charity is heresy and stuff like that. And you can make a lot of parody on doing that.
Were there any parts of your novels and or the adventures that have come from actually role-playing some of these things?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And situations and complications that I didn't foresee. And it's the same thing when I write the novels and I write the games as well. I don't really know what will happen. I don't want to know, and I don't need to know, and I shouldn't know, because one of the big problems for me writing novels is that I have to keep myself interested, because if I'm not interested, it gets boring, and then the writing gets bad. There's a balance between planning what you're going to do in a novel and in a game, and between improvising. So what I try to work as an orienteering mode. I know I'm going there, and then I'm going there, and then I'm going there, but I have no idea about the actual road there. So I work towards something, but I don't know which road I will take when I write. And that keeps me on my toes, and also, I guess, you get surprised as a writer. I think every writer has know this, that sometimes your characters say things or do things that you didn't expect, and suddenly you realize, I can't do it the way I planned. I have to change here because they just will not react like this.
This has also spawned music as well.
Yes. It was funny because the first adventure was called Svavelvinter, which has a nice sound in Swedish. When I Googled one day, I found out that there's a heavy metal band called Svavelvinter, a Swedish one. And I thought that can't be a coincidence. And so I got hold of this guy that was behind it all, and he said, "No, I'm an old role playing. I'm a gamer." And I thought it sounded cool, Okay, fine. So we talked and we sort of connected, and then we decided that let's do this album together. I write the lyrics and you do the music. So we did that. It was a full metal album, 8 songs, and it's on. You can actually listen to it Spotify or wherever.
Nowadays, you're working on the new adventures for Free League Press. And what's next?
Yeah, that's the question. I'm doing this Dragonbane thing. We're just on the first adventure, obviously. So there's at least 3 books in that, which will take 5 or 6 years, I suppose, in total. Not full-time work, but it will take that time to get around. And then I'm working on the last campaign for Forbidden Lands that I actually submitted to them a year ago, but then other things have happened. But now they have started to do it into actually publication. And we might continue with that game and redo the rules or something. And then I'm also trying to write some literary stuff. It's hard with the motivation to do that, actually, because people don't read books as much anymore. And I don't know. Right now, I have a project with short stories, and just to write something, because I like it when I write. It's good for me to write mentally.
People ask me, okay, if you're going to write fiction, are you going to write fiction that is set in the modern world? Is it fiction as in fantasy fiction as you have written? And I say, well, what's the difference?
Yeah. I agree with you. I don't believe in realism as such. And the real world can be explained better in a sort of model, like in 1984 or The Animal Farm. If I write fantasy, it's really about our world anyway. And like I said about these political and philosophical aspects I wanted to discuss, I can do that in a fantasy setting, and it relates to our world, of course. But then you can also, of course, write fantasy that is just for entertainment and you have no further ambitions with it. I get bored if I do that. It has to be something else in there, something that challenge me.
If anyone wants to play the original adventures, they are still in print or able to be found now?
No, they are in the secondhand market, and they are also collector's items now, so they are pretty expensive if you want them. But I actually submitted the first whole suite of adventures on the Creative Commons, so you can. It's in Swedish though, but it's free for download and use there under those conditions. And that is because I work in open source, because I like the concept of sharing.
Fantastic. Well, this has been a fascinating conversation. Thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
I wish I could read Swedish well enough to actually be able to do all of this. With Dragonbane, at least we can.
Absolutely. And Forbidden Lands also is in English. So.
Thanks to Erik for coming on the podcast. I also want to thank Christian Elverstam for giving me permission to have the song Vanderland featured on the podcast. Please check the show notes for links to Apple Music and Spotify for the full album, as well as the link to Erik's blog so you can see the translation of the lyrics. If you like role-playing games, then I suggest you take a listen to episode number 23 entitled Role-Playing Games Will Change Your Life, and my interview with game designers Georg Zoller and Emmanuel Lusinki in episode 29 about BioWare. I will soon be featuring a full episode with a story inspired by a role-playing session with my current role-playing group entitled Souls on Spine Hill. This episode will air sometime in February 2026. Thank you for listening to another episode of Tales Under the Cat Tree. Listen to the archives wherever you get your podcasts or at tales.dupes.ca. This podcast is about the worlds we create, the realities we conjure, and the wonder of the human condition. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please help me reach more people by subscribing or sharing this episode. This podcast, including its intro music, is produced, edited, and created by Dileepa Wijewardena. Give your pets a cuddle until we meet again for some Tales Under the Cat Tree.
Okay, so what do you think I do? What is your dream?